All right, this is pretty good UML. So what this is missing um, is a lot of the details that we're surely going to need as we build these objects. So a lot of the columns in our database are missing, and as are some of the functions that we're going to be needing as we develop the app. So this UML does not think through the rest of the dimensions of our application. What it does very well is establishes our entity relations. So how we are going to format the relationships between objects. This does this really well, and frankly, that's one of the more complex challenges that we need to consider when configuring our account, because adding a new field on what a user information is stored is no big deal, and we can continue to do that and adjust as needed as we solve the rest of the problems described in what we're trying to do here. Ignoring any of the rules about how to communicate one-to-many and many-to-many relationships with the various arrows and indicators. Let's just look at, let's talk this out. A user can have many devices entered into this project overhaul system, and each device can have many tasks. So a device, though, only has one user registered to it. A task will only have one device registered to it. Okay, each task can only have one invoice. Right. Okay. Once you do some work on a project, it has a flat rate. So I guess this should have a price associated with it, because how do you know the amount? Won't the invoice be the amount of each individual task? So the task will need to have some sort of price here. But it will be a part of one invoice. And the invoice, though, will have many different tasks potentially added on to their bill. It'll track if it's paid. Issues, I don't know what that is. I think we can get rid of that. But a task can also have many messages. But a message will only be a part of one task. So that way you can communicate about that repair type. So yeah, just the price added to that. But everything else seems pretty cut and dry. A invoice will only have one user, and that's the customer. And the user will have many potential invoices. Okay, cool. I think this looks good. Let's get this started. Okay, so now the first thing that we need to do is add a folder for your module. And the ideal naming convention would be, what if we were to add this module apart from your business to any other app? What sort of core functions would we call that group of, what would we call that thing that you're adding? And this is really sort of like a task management. So I'm just going to create a folder called task, because really that's the core item in your solution is about tracking tasks and billing them. So now I've added 3 files to this, and so now it's a module in your app, which it also needs a template, and I assume that you're going to have some sort of home screen for that module. When you're starting with the model, it's good to start with some sort of example, and there are books that have example models and and suggest ways to format a database. And so there are many different ways, but I've worked with a couple different projects similar to this that I'm going to pull from. And we can also just take from the models that you have right here as well. And because yours will actually pretty easy. We don't have many-to-many relationships really in your schema, so we don't need really helper tables, and so we can get rid of some of these things. So now that we have a starting point, let's just go ahead and start editing these from here. I need to keep this in one half of my window. Alright, so let's start with a device. It has an ID. It's going to have a user ID because a device will have one user. Yep. It will have a name. Name will have a model number, which is sometimes alphanumeric, so it makes sense that it remains a string. Probably it doesn't need a body. Instead, it needs a serial number, and we may run encryption on that just to keep that safe in the database. Let's see. I think that's alive, created date, slug, I don't think. Actually, it might need a slug. No, it'll just be an ID. We don't need to look it up by an article name. And I don't think we need to have an image on that phone device. We can just have an icon or something. So we don't need that. Publish date. How about created date. The method. Yeah, alright. You can't have the property the same as something that's already there. We'll create it on, which is a method that will naturalize this date time. So that's cool. And we don't need any of these right now. We'll come back and do the application layer later. And device. Alright. So we have a device. Cool. And now we have a device, and now it has a user. It's a foreign key. And so that's establishing that database relationship right there. We can clarify the relationship still further here by saying we can give it a user object. So if I ever looked up a device in my application and I hit .user, I'd like it to automatically connect me with the user associated with that. So that's just a db.relationship, just like that. And we're casting this relationship with the user object, and let's see. And then we want keyword arguments like back populates or backref, and that will populate the user devices. So the user will have devices, and each connection will help populate that. A user, if I hit devices, this will help. This connection here is how it will look that up. It'll bundle them together because it's a one-to-many, and so the user can have many devices. But okay, I think that's all I need. Yep. Oh, but I also need a task, a one-to-many. So this is with a task object, and back populates a task will have a device, a single device. And if it's driving you nuts that I'm using double quotes here and single quotes here, then you're paying attention, and it's also driving me nuts. Okay, so we have all of this stuff here. Oh, we need Boolean, right? If it's completed, right? Completed, true, false. Yeah. So I think you'll notice sometimes I have parentheses after these, sometimes I don't. I think that it's whether or not I'm calling the instantiator, the constructor to instantiate this when creating the column. So what goes in this column? Well, an instantiated float. well, at least a reference to an instantiated float. So I think it'll call the instantiation whether or not I include the parentheses. So that's another inconsistency that it's best to figure out what's happening there for sure and stick with one way and not flip-flop like I'm doing here. So anyway, I'm just trying to learn how to be a better programmer while I'm doing this stuff. Oh, you know what? We actually need a date completed. You should be able to track when that happened. And that way you don't actually need a completed property or not, because it'll be whether or not it's completed. In fact, you can turn that into a handy little method. And so you can have a property, so dot completed. You don't need to use parentheses. We'll have it a property, so you can just do dot completed. And if there is a date, if self dot date completed, if there's something there, then return, you could return true. Yeah, return true. Else return false. So that way you can, Python is capitalized. You can use that and it'll see if it's completed or not. So that way you have a Boolean, but it'll just be based on whether or not you have a date completed filled in. So when there's a one-to-many relationship, so a task will only be a part of one device, then we have a foreign key. So then we'll just use this device ID, and it'll just link straight to the device ID. Okay, cool. So this will pull this ID. This is this ID as a foreign key, and this is how we establish this database relationship. We can, and now if I could just do this as a backref, and I wouldn't need to put this line in, but I can do just so I can have a device if I ever wanted to directly look it up. I just note the relationship with a device, and that back populates this thing's tasks. Okay. A task will also only ever be a part of one single invoice. So invoice ID and invoice. So you might want, so similarly, you could add in another property on this task. Let's say you wanted to see if this has ever been billed. And so this is, if there's an invoice ID, then say return true, I have billed, this task was billed. If not, it wasn't. And so if it has been, if there's a note there that it's linked to an invoice, it's been billed. This, it disgusts me. Look at what I just did. I just return, all I have to do is return, and that's whether or not, if there is one, if that's true. Oh, but no, see, I need to typecast if this is true or false. So I have to hit it with like a bool. I have to double check that. There we go. Alright. So same thing here. Return the Boolean of whether or not date completed. If it's there, then it's true. If it's not, so alright. I almost really disappointed myself. Okay, I think these are done. An invoice will have only one user, which will have many invoices. An invoice will have many tasks, but each task only has one invoice. Yep, okay. Lines up. Oh, this is a message. Okay, and this is an invoice. Returns if it was paid, if it was sent. Okay, cool. You just need to edit the user thing, and then what I need you to do is to try and nuke and recreate your database.